What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And Happy New Year to everyone, as we have a jam-packed show today, as the AVCA women's and men's preseason volleyball polls have been released. The women have their first top 25 preseason rankings, while the men have their first top 15 rankings. Which teams are on top? Which teams are the early favorite to win it all this year? And which teams are ranked a little too high and a little too low? Also, the SEC has released its spring volleyball schedule. Currently, we have Kentucky out in front, but will Florida, Arkansas, Missouri, and all the other SEC teams have something to say about it? Or will the Wildcats reign supreme on top of the conference? Also, the Big Ten has released its women's volleyball schedule for the spring schedule. Which team is favored? Which matchups are the ones to watch for? And which team will be standing on top of the Big Ten women's volleyball ladder? Also, we have a big special announcement toward the end of the show. What will this announcement be? Well, you gotta stay tuned toward the end of the show. All that and more here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point, and the first in 2021 here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon, evening, wherever you are listening to. It's much appreciated, and like I said, Happy New Year to everyone who didn't hear me on Friday when I wished everybody a Happy New Year. I hope everyone is having a great New Year, and I hope everyone's New Year is going better than the Miami Dolphins is. I'm just kidding, Miami fans and Dolphins fans. You know, I'm just messing with y'all. But anyway, without any further delay, let's get on into the volleyball action. Let's dive on into this volleyball action like a libero. You feel me? So, first and foremost, we have all sorts of volleyball news. We're going to go through the AVCA coaches polls first. Let's start with the women's poll, because obviously it's ladies first. Like if you're thinking otherwise, then you are not a gentleman and you don't know the proper rules of etiquette. Anyway, so this was just released today on the NCAA women's volleyball Twitter account as well as the AVCA Twitter account. So here are the top 25 in the terms of the preseason. And this is just the preseason. It's not going to really matter. I mean, it kind of does matter depending on who's who and who's the early favorite going forward. But I think we all know who the early favorite should be. And if you don't know, just put it in the chat room. I will give you all about 10 seconds. Okay, time's up. Alright, so if you haven't locked in your answer, or if you haven't written it down on a piece of paper and whatnot, well, time's up, and it's time to go over the top 25 rankings. So let's start with 25 through 21. So 25 through 21, at number 25, we have Western Kentucky. Quite astounding to see Western Kentucky starting off, considering I didn't know what's overly special about them. They have played one match. They played UAB, and they swept them, but I don't know. I think there are a few other teams that are a little deserving of that, but I digress. So number 24 is Michigan. Michigan's going to be quite the interesting choice for number 24, considering Michigan got one and done in the first round of the NCAA tournament last year, and they play in a competitive Big Ten conference, so it remains to be seen if they can stay in the top 25. So number 23 is San Diego, University of San Diego, not UC San Diego. So San Diego, the last year's West Coast Conference champion, is number 23, and they returned quite a bit of players outside of their setter. we'll see if they can get the job done this year. Number 22 is UCLA, a team that I think most people kind of forgot about, but this team is actually quite good. They return all but a couple players from last year. They return players like reigning Pac-12 Player of the Year Mac May, and they return Devin Chang and a few others. Devin Chang is the younger sister of Peyton Chang, my guest from the past 2 weeks. And I think the Bruins can do some damage. And at number 21 is Hawaii, the Big West Conference champion, which made it all the way to the Sweet 16 before losing to, I believe it was Wisconsin. It was either Wisconsin or Nebraska. Either way, they lost in the round of 16. They did register a couple tournament wins, and it wasn't easy for them to win the Big West Conference, but they got the job done. All right, so once again, recapping, 25 through 21, Western Kentucky, Michigan, San Diego, UCLA, and Hawaii. So now 20 through 16, 20 is Marquette, the runner-up from the Big East Conference behind Creighton. So good to see Marquette up there in the top 20. Number 19 is Pitt, who has already played in the fall season, and Pitt falls in at number 19. Number 18 is Georgia Tech, which I can't... Does it feel weird when I say that Georgia Tech is ranked above Pitt? I mean, they're having a phenomenal year. They're 7-1, but they still have the ladder of their ACC schedule to go. So that is quite unusual to see Georgia Tech above Pitt, but who am I to judge? Number 17 is Missouri, who already played in fall play in the SEC. And then rounding up 20 through 16 is BYU. BYU is kind of also an oddball that's ranked a little... I feel they're kind of ranked a little high. I mean, they lost quite a bit of starters from last year, but honestly, BYU is always that perennial powerhouse team. Do I think they can do good this year? Of course. It all still remains to be seen because San Diego does return more of its starters. So, gotta give a shout to Marcus Losgreat in the house. Thank you for joining in. He will be returning today for Gloves Off at 7 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And he's here to give you what you want. He's here to give you what you need. And he's gonna do it in a crispy iSports Radio black tee. Or a white tee, depending on what he's wearing. But thank you for tuning in, Marcus. Anyway, so 15 through 11. 15 is Creighton, the Big East Conference champion from last year. Number 14 is Notre Dame, who I think is kind of ranked a little low, in my opinion. Maybe it's because they still have more to prove, but they do return a lot of starters, so I kind of don't understand why they're only 14th, but who's to say? 13 is Purdue from the Big Ten, the Boilermakers. Number 12 is Louisville, which I kind of find that a little... Louisville, to me, is too high. I'm going to just get this right out of the way. Louisville should not be number 12. Louisville lost to Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is number 14. What is this? You can't rank Louisville, which got swept at Louisville by Notre Dame. Absolutely bogus. Anyway, number 11, rounding up 15 through 11, is Florida. Florida, I kind of understand why, because they lost to Georgia and South Carolina. There's no way they're a top 10 team after those two losses. And once again, and a shout out to Andrew Hagenbaugh, who just popped in the chat room. Thank you for tuning in, brother. I appreciate you. And he says, have a great show. And Marcus says, Tuesday gang in the house. Hey, that's what's up, though, Marcus. Anyway, 10 through 6. So the top 10. So 10 through 6. Number 10 is Utah. Kind of surprised to see Utah in the top 10 because they kind of lost a few starters. But the thing about Utah is that they played their best volleyball in the postseason. And they almost beat Stanford in the Sweet 16. So I kind of understand why Utah is ranked up there. Again, this is kind of reflecting from last year's, almost reflecting of last year's tournament and last year's results, but it's still a work in progress. So number 9 is Penn State. Penn State is no surprise that they're in the top 10. Believe it or not, they have actually been ranked almost 10 years straight in the top 20 in the top 25. They are 9.8 years inside the top 25, which is quite astounding. That's kind of your little Snapple fact of the day. So, number 8 is Washington. Another little surprise to see in the top 10 because Washington did lose Kara Bejema to graduation, but Washington always has a decent team every year. The only time they're inconsistent is probably in Pac-12 play, which is understandable just because the Pac-12 is a dogfight in there. I almost said bullfight, but whatever. Anyway, number 7 is Minnesota. Minnesota made the Final Four last year, which is definitely understandable on why they're top 10 material. And they do return quite a bit of stars, but you'll see why they're ranked number 7. I kind of think that's where they belong. I feel maybe Penn State can knock them off, but it still remains to be seen. And also, I think Minnesota wouldn't have gotten to the Final Four if Texas hadn't lost in the Sweet 16 to Louisville. That's just my take. So rounding up 6 through 10 is Baylor at number 6. Baylor's only 3 losses are to Texas, which was ranked number 1 in the fall, and Kansas, which that was the first game of the Big 12 season, or the Baylor's season for that matter. So they kind of went in with a little cold feet and whatnot. So, but either way, Baylor is number 6, and they won't be winning the Big 12 conference as Texas has locked up that conference, even if Texas loses its last 2 games and whatnot. So there's that. So now 5 through 1. Here we go. 5 through 1, the top 5. So number 5 is Nebraska. Nebraska, this team I can see being a top 5 team. They made it to the Elite 8 before losing to the eventual finalist, which I'll be naming off in a little bit. Nebraska returns all of its players. That's the big thing everyone needs to know. Nebraska returns all of its players, including All-American Lexi Sun. So, honestly, this team is going to be a powerhouse. This team's going to be dangerous in the Big Ten, and this team's going to be dangerous going forward in terms of the NCAA women's volleyball season. So number 4 is Kentucky. Kentucky currently sits atop of the SEC. They're 8-0. They've only dropped 3 sets all year, and they had the number 1 recruiting class of 2020. That's no surprise that they're number 4. I could see them being a top 10 team. Number 3 is the reigning NCAA champion Stanford. Stanford, I can understand why they're number 3 and not number 2 or number 1, because Stanford lost a lot of players to graduation. They lost their opposite hitter / outside hitter, Catherine Plummer. They lost their setter, Jenna Gray. They lost their libero, Morgan Hentz. They lost their middle blocker / opposite, Audrina Fitzmaurice. They lost their middle blocker, Maddie Gates. They lost a lot of players from last year, but they do return a plethora of players, and they brought in another good group of talented players. A few players I could see having a big year is Megan McClure and Kendall Kipp, as they'll probably be filling in for Plummer and Fitzmaurice on the outside and right side. So we'll see. So that's Stanford at number 3. Number 2 is Texas. Texas I can understand being at number 2 because Texas has locked up the Big 12 conference. Like I said, they will not be sharing it, and they will not be, losing it by any means. They have 2 conference games remaining, but they're not going to lose their last 2 conference games. They're not. So they could just focus on non-conference play and preparing for the NCAA tournament because they have locked up an automatic bid. So there's that. So now for the number 1 team. The number 1 team in the AVCA women's volleyball polls is, and can I get a drum roll please? Wisconsin! Yes, Wisconsin is the number 1 team. The last year's runner-up from the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament, or 2019's runner-up in the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament, is the number 1 team in the AVCA preseason polls. And for good reason. They returned 4 All-Americans, led by Dana Retke, the 6'8" powerhouse giant who is just freaking flat-out just dominant in the middle. She could also be dominant on the right side as well. that Wisconsin team is going to be good, and I'm really excited. And if there's any year that Wisconsin needs to win the NCAA tournament, this is the year, because this is probably going to be their best team since last year's team. I hate to say it, and they may not have had the most glamorous schedule, or they may not have been undefeated, and they may have dropped like 4 games, but their team is so impressive, and I think this team can definitely take it all this year. Like it's all about consistency. And here's the thing about Wisconsin: they get battle tested in the ever so tough Big Ten. They get tested by teams like Penn State, Nebraska, Minnesota. Heck, even the lower teams like Indiana, I think maybe Northwestern, Michigan State, and Purdue also give them a tough match as well. But I think they got it right with Wisconsin being number 1, and I have high expectations for that team. Now, before I go to the men's side of the top 15, I will say this: I think Texas State or Coastal Carolina should be in the top 25. I know Texas State is receiving votes, but I think Texas State rightfully deserves to be in the top 25. I know their loss to UTEP and their loss to UT Arlington kind of hurts them, but honestly, they deserve to be in the top 25 because they, first of all, won their conference. Second of all, they won the conference tournament over then undefeated Coastal Carolina, even though that has a little bit of an asterisk by it. And honestly, I think people are overlooking Texas State. I think Western Kentucky and Texas State need to be flip-flopped. Just my opinion. Maybe Western Kentucky is better than most people say, and I'm just overlooking Western Kentucky. But, what do I know? So that's the top 25 for the women's side. Now let's go to the top 15 for the men's side. So the top 15 AVCA men's Division 1 and 2 coaches poll. So let's go 15 through 11. Number 15 is Stanford. Stanford being a part of the Mountain Pacific Sports Federation Conference. Keep in mind this is Stanford's last year before their program gets shut down by Stanford, and hopefully, Stanford men's volleyball and all the other programs at Stanford don't get shut down. Hopefully Stanford finds it deep within their heart to keep their programs, especially the men's volleyball program. They've won 2 NCAA titles. I just don't see why they would want to get rid of it, which it still boggles my mind, but I digress. So, number 14, and Andrew, I hope you're listening. Number 14 on the AVCA men's volleyball coaches poll, preseason poll, is Ohio State. Ohio State has some talent that they have that returns, and getting Jimmy Webb, a former player from Orange Coast College, is a huge deal. And Webb and Coach Kevin Birch both have ties to Travis Turner and the head coach at Orange Coast College's men's volleyball team. So I think adding Jimmy Webb definitely helps the Buckeyes out a lot, and especially since the Buckeyes started out hot and then they kind of fizzled out when they faced some of those bigger teams such as like UCLA and whatnot. But I think Ohio State can maybe challenge a few of these teams. Definitely having Jimmy Webb helps out, but here's the thing about Jimmy Webb. He was in I want to say it was in the U.S. Coast Guard or the Marines or whatnot, so I hope he's still fresh when it comes to volleyball. But regardless, Jimmy Webb has a mean powerhouse serve. He's got a cannon up for an arm. I think Ohio State has a bright future depending on what Webb's eligibility looks like. So anyway, number 13 is George Mason, which is no big surprise. George Mason was kind of up and down. Their signature win, in my opinion, was against Pepperdine last year, despite missing 3 of its starters. So George Mason checks in at number 3. Number 12 is Concordia Irvine. They had a few standout victories, such as their opponent against UC Irvine, which was cool. And they're checking in at number 12. And number 11 to round off the 11 through 15 is Penn State. Penn State is kind of where they need to be. They did post victories over UCLA, but UCLA was banged up at the moment. They didn't have Danon Guyama, and that was kind of easy pickings for Penn State. I wouldn't say easy pickings, but you know what I mean. Like, UCLA was vulnerable. They had so many question marks, and they had so many fresh faces on their team as well. So that's 15 through 11. Once again, 15 through 11 is Stanford, Ohio State, George Mason, Concordia Irvine, and Penn State. Now let's go 10 through 6. So number 10, and I hope Marcus is still listening in the chat room, is Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon, to me, has a bright future ahead of them, and they posted so many outstanding victories, and they have so much talent on that roster. I think that team definitely has what it takes to compete in the MPSF. My only problem is, can they surpass a certain team that's in the MPSF? That still remains to be seen, but I think they can do it. I think they could challenge the top-tier team in the MPSF. So number 9 is UCLA. Now, UCLA's kind of... I think they're perfect the way they are. I think they might be they're kind of a little bit lower than I expected, but the Bruins did have some injuries last year, and they had such a young team, with that had players playing different positions. I think this UCLA team, if they stay healthy and they figure everything out, will be really good this year. And they should be good, because last year they had a lot of high expectations until they lost to Penn State, UC San Diego. I want to say they lost to another team, but I don't have their schedule on me. All I just know is that UCLA struggled, and they even struggled against Princeton, which that's really concerning right there. So anyway, tied for number 7 and 8 is UC San Diego and Pepperdine. So UC San Diego had such a historic year last year. They had a newcomer, Kyle McCauley, just absolutely make that program into a powerhouse, and they have all sorts of talent all over the place. So UC San Diego is going to be a team to watch for in the Big West Conference. A pair of the two big victories that UC San Diego had were against UC Irvine. Those were the first ever Big West Conference victories for UC San Diego, because UC San Diego was an expansion team the past 2 years, and they were pretty much the bottom feeder of that conference. When they had the honor of being the two teams that kicked off conference play early, and when I saw they beat UC Irvine not once, but twice at UC Irvine, I was just astounded. I was like, wow, this UC San Diego team is not playing games. So definitely huge right there for UC San Diego, and I have big expectations for them. And as long as none of their players opted out or moved on, I think they're going to be a fun team to watch in the Big West Conference. And then Pepperdine has also talent all across the board. I don't know if they'll still have Noah Dyer, because I don't know their whole little situation of opt-ins and opt-outs, but this team definitely has some upswing. One setter that I think is going to be worth watching is Joe Carlos, who made the All-MPSF freshman team last year, and I think he, despite being about 5'11"-ish, is a talent worth noting, and I think this dude is going to set the bar for Pepperdine. No pun intended, because he's a setter. But anyway, to number 6, rounding off 6 through 10, is UC Irvine. Now, UC Irvine, I think, is kind of a little high. I think they kind of should be in that threshold with Pepperdine and UC San Diego, because they do return quite a bit of starters, but they had kind of an underwhelming season. They lost to UC San Diego. They lost a few matches, which I kind of didn't expect them to lose. I think it got to the point where they almost fell out of the top 10, but they managed to turn it around late before the season got canceled. And who knows, maybe the Anteaters would have done well in conference play. They also got to play Hawaii early on, which that wasn't pretty. It wasn't in a conference game. It was just in a little mini Hawaii tournament, which I kind of am against. I think conference teams shouldn't be playing one another in non-conference games. But that's just my take. Anyway, so that's 10 through 6. Grand Canyon, UCLA, UC San Diego, and Pepperdine, along with UC Irvine. Pepperdine and UC San Diego are both tied for 7th. So now, 5 through 1. Number 5 is Lewis. Lewis has... I think this is exactly where I see Lewis. Lewis is a good number 5 team, but here's the thing about being the number 5 team. And here's the thing about Lewis. If you're the number 5 team, you're in the worst situation possible. And also, Lewis is good, but they're only good in their conference. They struggle against teams outside of their conference, in my opinion. I think this team is up there, but I don't see them like as a powerhouse contention in like the top 4. I don't see them as a Final Four team. Like, obviously they made the Final Four back in 2019, but the talent has stepped up. I'm just going to say that. And I don't know if I think Lewis might have taken a step back in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. And this is the same Lewis from Romeoville. So anyway, number 4 is the so-called reigning champion, Long Beach State, because the 2020 season didn't get finished, and theoretically Long Beach State is still the reigning champion. But anyway, Long Beach State checks in at number 4. They return all their players except for a couple. Obviously, and one of their players that isn't returning was kind of a big player here. I believe he decided to opt out, and he decided to step away from volleyball, and that was Carlos Rivera. And unfortunately, it's unfortunate because he had a lot of shoes to fill, but I think he unfortunately decided to move on, and I respect his wish, and I wish him nothing but the best. So, unfortunately, we won't be seeing any Carlos Rivera this year. So it sucks, but it is what it is, and it's his decision. But hey, Long Beach State has a lot of players that could fill in the role. They even have Alan Knipe's son, or Coach Alan Knipe's son, Aiden, who can fill in the role at the setter position. But we'll see. So now we'll go to number 3, which is UC Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara was having the most historic season out there. They had only lost twice, and that was to a certain other team who will be named later on the list. But they were playing on the road. But UC Santa Barbara was having the most... probably could have won the Big West Conference. I think it really sucks that COVID had to happen, because I think if Santa Barbara played their cards right, they could have been the Big West Conference champion. And the thing about UC Santa Barbara is they're kind of like the Chicago Cubs, or what's a good team to describe them as? I'll describe them as like the Buffalo Bills. Let's say that. They're kind of the Buffalo Bills of this team, except they've never been to the finals. They've never had a finals appearance, and last year could have been a great year for that to change. So, but unfortunately for them, they're still in search of making the Big West Conference and NCAA final. This is definitely their year to do so, because they returned so much talent, and they would have had talent all across the board, even with that, if their players had opted out. But I still think they have all their team going forward. So I'll have to check on that. So anyway, number 2 is Hawaii. So Hawaii is quite the fascinating number 2 team in the AVCA men's volleyball poll. I expected them to be number 2, considering they have such a talented team, and they returned most of their players. They did have 4 players that made their decision of they're not going to move on from Hawaii, and it's for good reason too. I think it's a tough decision, but some of those players did left their mark at Hawaii, and I think. But one player who I do see coming back for Hawaii is Rado Parapanov, who was their powerhouse hitter, and I think this is a Hawaii team that is going to pick up where they left off last year. They only suffered one loss prior, and that was to the number 1 team. But other than that, this is a team that I think can definitely do some damage, and I think they can dominate in India springtime. So we'll see how it goes, though. So now let's go for some of their players that stepped down, that are pretty much going to be opting out, are Colton Cowell, who was a significant hitter, James Anastasiadis, and I think it's just those two. I think Cowell was a graduate senior from last year, and Anastasiadis was a senior as well. But I think Rado Propanov is there to stay, along with Patrick Gassman. So we'll see. So now for the number one team in the AVCA men's volleyball polls. And after this, we're going to take ourselves a quick break. So the number one team in the AVCA men's volleyball polls is, can we get a drum roll? BYU, which is no surprise because they are a very talented team, and personally I think they're the team to beat. Like, they're the team to beat in the MPSF, they're the team to beat all over the place in the NCAA. They only had one loss, and that was to what's their face? Hawaii, obviously. And I think, and they actually had a 2-0 lead until Hawaii pulled off the victory, and it's kind of a bummer, but that they had to lose that game before COVID happened. But I think BYU would have still been at number one. They actually were the new number one team after the series between BYU and Hawaii, and they have a talented head coach in Sean Olmstead who knows his stuff. So good on them, and I think that their team is going to be something to watch for. I think BYU has what it takes, and I think this is a team that no one wants to see in the NCAA tournament right now. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see. We shall see. But other than that, I think that's going to be it for the NCAA men's volleyball aspect. I think the men's volleyball top 15 is pretty much perfect as is. I think I'd like to see UCLA a little bit higher. I think I'd like to see UC Irvine a little bit lower, but we'll see. By the way, BYU also returns its AVCA Player of the Year, Gabby Garcia Fernandez. Like, that dude is going to be huge for the Cougars, and I think that team is still a team to watch for. So, anyway, now that that's out of the way, we're actually going to take ourselves a quick little break. When we come back, we will be going over the SEC volleyball schedule, and we'll be going over the super special announcement that I promised at the end of the show. But before we go to a break, we have a couple sponsors iSports Radio would like to shout out. The first one is Legacy Financial. It's been a tough year, especially in 2020. However, staying positive, keeping your faith, and continuing to work hard is the goal. If you're ever in a financial struggle at the moment and you need help, call 951-732-0130 or 510-928-2104 to book your appointment today. Andrew and Io are just two people on a mission to help families build a legacy. You can follow them on Twitter at legacy_uncut, and then on Instagram at Sims_uncut. And then the other sponsor for iSports Radio is... That's actually it. Yeah, it was just Legacy Financial as our sponsor. So, yeah, that was my bad. But you could definitely check out iSports Radio on the websites, and you can follow iSports Radio on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and you can check out the website iSportsRadio.com. So, there's that. So, let's take ourselves a quick little commercial break, and when we come back, let's discuss the SEC spring schedule, the spring volleyball schedule. You're listening to Set Point here on iSports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hey guys, it's Blake Henley, better known as H-Town Blake to some of you. Happy to announce that Bases Loaded is back and in full force. We'll be bringing that high heat every Tuesday night here on IE Sports Radio. So come home, get ready, dig into that batter's box, and see if you can chase that high heat, baby. So we'll be coming to you live with all the stats, all the rundowns, all the division rivalries, and every team that's going to make the playoff push to get to that one and only October and get to the pinnacle of what baseball is, to hoist that Commissioner's Trophy when it's all said and done.
What's good, fight fans? It's your boy, Marcus Los Great, here to give you what you want, here to give you what you need. Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm coming to you live, straight from your mama's basement with a crispy, awesome white tea. We are coming to you live every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Powered by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
And you could check out Mr. Marcus Los Great later on today, as the Tuesday gang is back in the house, as Marcus is back with Gloves Off, which talks about boxing, combat sports, MMA, you name it. He'll be making his return in about 1 hour and 22 minutes from now. So definitely do check out Marcus Los Great and Gloves Off at 7 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And also after this show, we have the NorCal Faithful Show with Big Dan. He comes on in 22 minutes, and he does a great job talking about Northern California sports and whatnot. So definitely do check out Danny Medina, or Big Dan. Oops, my bad. My bad, Dan. Yeah, definitely check out Big Dan. So anyway, Segment 2 is underway, and we're going to try to get through this as quick as possible. So, the SEC has released its spring volleyball schedule. So, going back to the SEC volleyball standings, let's go through all 13 teams, shall we? Starting with 13 through 11. So, the dead last team of the SEC is Auburn at 0-8. Ole Miss is number 12 at 0-6, and Mississippi State is 2-6, rounding off 13 through 11. So now let's go through the 10th. Let's go through 10th through 6th. The 10th ranked team in terms of the SEC volleyball standings is Alabama at 2-6. LSU is number 9 at 3-3. Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas A&M all occupy 6 through 8, as they're all 4-4 in conference play and in overall play. Keep in mind that the SEC didn't play any non-conference games because they started late and whatnot. So there's that. So now let's go through 5 through 1. So the 5th ranked team in the SEC volleyball standings is South Carolina at 5-3. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th ranked team in the SEC standings is Arkansas, Florida, and Missouri. And the number 1 team and the team that's out in front in the SEC is, can we get a drum roll? Kentucky, which most of you already know because I pretty much said it earlier on in the show. So Kentucky is currently 8-0, and they are in a great spot going into the spring session of the NCAA women's volleyball season. So that's it. They're in a very good spot, and there's a reason why they're number one in the SEC as of right now, because they had the number one recruiting class in 2020, and this team is just well coached. They have talent all across the board. And I think this team is going to be something to watch as the spring goes on. So, all right. So now let's look at some of these SEC matchups, because we only have 20 minutes before the next show goes on. So SEC play starts on Friday, January 29th, and here are some of the matchups. And the first matchups on January 29th are South Carolina at Alabama, Kentucky at Arkansas, Florida at Ole Miss, Georgia at Mississippi State, and LSU at Missouri. The matchup that stands out to me, in my opinion, is, I can't believe I'm saying this, Kentucky at Arkansas. Arkansas was the last team I would think that was going to be challenging Kentucky for the SEC crown, but sure enough, Arkansas is 6-2. They have struggled against ranked teams, and I don't really think I'm going to count Texas A&M, because Texas A&M wound up disappointing me. Hint, hint, going back to a few episodes ago. But I think Arkansas could challenge Kentucky, and Kentucky is going to play at Arkansas, so we'll see if they can get the job done. So that's the matchup of the night right there in the SEC, Kentucky at Arkansas. Highlight this because we're going to be having a test on this in the near future. So anyway, Saturday, January 30th, we have South Carolina at Alabama, Kentucky at Arkansas, Texas A&M at Auburn, Florida at Ole Miss, Georgia at Mississippi State, LSU at Missouri. And then I guess it's also worth noting that Sunday, January 31st is Texas A&M at Auburn, because I don't know why, but Auburn and Texas A&M are playing on different days. I don't know why, but it's whatever. But again, Kentucky at Arkansas are the matchups of the weekend right there. So definitely watch those. All the others don't really appeal to me as much. I guess maybe Georgia at Mississippi State, but I think the matchup of the weekend that weekend is definitely Kentucky at Arkansas. So let's go Thursday. So Thursday through Sunday, we have all the matches are spread out. So Thursday, February 4th, we have Arkansas at Georgia, Auburn at LSU, and Mississippi State at South Carolina. I think the matchup for Thursday, February 4th is Arkansas at Georgia. February 5th is Alabama at Ole Miss, Arkansas at Georgia, Auburn at LSU, and Mississippi State at South Carolina. I still think that Arkansas at Georgia is quite the interesting matchup. Saturday, February 6th is Alabama at Ole Miss, Missouri at Florida, and Tennessee at Texas A&M. The Missouri-Florida one is going to be crucial, and whoever loses that series, or whoever loses one or both matchups, is going to be further behind the SEC 8-ball. And here's the thing about if Florida loses that. If Florida loses that, they're going to be in a huge pickle going into the latter part of the SEC women's volleyball schedule. So definitely going to be something to watch for in terms of Missouri at Florida. And then Sunday, February 7th is Missouri at Florida and Tennessee at Texas A&M. I'll be interested to see how Tennessee at A&M does. Maybe Tennessee has challenged some of the bigger teams, but they haven't really pulled off the victory. They did pull off a victory over Georgia and South Carolina earlier in the year, but that's kind of about it. But we'll see how it goes. So anyway, Wednesday, February 10th, Thursday, February 11th, Friday, February 12th, and Saturday, February 13th, and Sunday, February 14th. Has a plethora of games. They have a lot of games spread out. Holy moly. So, first matchup on Wednesday, February 10th is LSU at Florida, then Texas A&M at South Carolina. I'll be interested to see if South Carolina can take down Texas A&M. Now, here's the thing about Texas A&M. They started off 4-0. They finished their fall season 0-4. If Texas A&M wants to have any hope of maybe wowing any of the NCAA big big rigs or the people that are picking the at-large teams, they're going to probably need to win as much as they can because their schedule does not get any easier for them. So A&M South Carolina will probably be one to watch for. Then Thursday, February 11th, we had LSU at Florida, Ole Miss at Mississippi State, and Texas A&M at South Carolina. The Ole Miss versus Mississippi State matchup is one to watch for, even though both teams aren't too big up to snuff. That's basically the Egg Bowl, or the Egg Bowl matchup, the Egg matchup. Either way, it's the battle for Mississippi. So Friday, February 12th, we have Alabama at Arkansas, Ole Miss at Mississippi State, and Missouri at Tennessee. Nothing's too appealing other than Missouri at Tennessee. Again, Tennessee has kind of been that frisky team, which hopefully can register a big-time win. Their biggest win of the season was against South Carolina, but I don't know. I don't think they have yet to really prove themselves. So Saturday, February 13th, the matchups include Alabama at Arkansas, Kentucky at Georgia, Missouri at Tennessee. Kentucky-Georgia is the matchup to watch for. Kentucky-Georgia is basically is kind of the matchup worth seeing, considering Georgia beat Kentucky last year. They along with Texas A&M were the only teams to knock off Kentucky, which anything is possible in the SEC. I'm just going to leave it at that. So there's that. And then Sunday, February 14th, we have Kentucky at Georgia. Again, I think Kentucky-Georgia is going to be pivotal because Georgia already upset Florida this year. Like, Georgia is also another one of those frisky teams where they sometimes stumble their way into a victory, and that could also be the difference between making the NCAA tournament as an at-large team and maybe missing the NCAA tournament as an at-large team. We'll see. So now, next week, the week after, we have Wednesday, February 17th. The only matchup we have is Auburn at Bama, the Iron Bowl matchup, which is not football, it's volleyball. Either way, that's going to be a fun matchup, except both teams are kind of subpar in terms of records. But I digress. So anyway, Thursday, February 18th, we have Auburn at Alabama, Arkansas at LSU, and Tennessee at Ole Miss. Nothing really stands out on that day. I'm sorry, but nothing really does other than Auburn and Alabama. So Friday, February 19th, we have Arkansas at LSU, Florida at Mississippi State, Georgia at Missouri, Tennessee at Ole Miss. Georgia at Missouri is also another matchup to watch for just because Missouri has also been challenged quite a bit. They were challenged by Ole Miss before the season ended, and they were also challenged by Arkansas, but they managed to pull through. So, again, Georgia's that type of team that can sometimes sneak out a victory when they're not expected to sneak out a victory. So, there's that. That's the only noteworthy matchup for Friday, February 19th. So Saturday, February 20th, we have Florida at Mississippi State, Georgia at Missouri, and South Carolina at Kentucky. South Carolina at Kentucky is probably the only matchup that's worth noting, along with the Sunday matchup between South Carolina and Kentucky. I think both those teams are going to put forth a hard-fought match, or hard-fought matches, and I think South Carolina has a decent shot of knocking off Kentucky. To me, I think Kentucky is just too much for them. But don't be surprised because, again, SEC upsets are possible. Unless it's football and then Alabama's just dominating everyone. Anyway, so now for Thursday, February 25th, the only matchup that's going on is Florida at Tennessee. I hope Tennessee can put up a good fight against Florida because Florida is on a mission and they're behind the 8 ball. So if they want to have any hope of winning the SEC, they kind of got to run the table and maybe get some help along the way. So Friday, February 26th, we have Mississippi State at Alabama, Florida at Tennessee, Kentucky at Texas A&M, and Missouri at South Carolina. Kentucky at Texas A&M is the noteworthy matchup considering you never know with Texas A&M. Maybe, maybe they could pull out a victory. And big shout to Christopher Lemon, who congratulated me on making the iSports Radio Hall of Fame. Thank you, my friend. And he says, "Go Dogs." I assume Mississippi State or Bulldog or Georgia. I'll pretty much presume Mississippi State. If I'm wrong, then feel free to correct me. Anyway, so for Friday, February 26th, Kentucky at Texas A&M is kind of the matchup for me because I think Texas A&M has a lot to prove, and they did beat Kentucky last year, but I think that Kentucky's just too much. And Christopher Lemont says Georgia. And Georgia has a pretty good team. I'm just going to say that right now, Chris, because Georgia knocked off number 4 Florida. Actually, no, then number 5 Florida in 4 sets before the fall volleyball season ended. So that Georgia women's volleyball team is pretty good. So I think you got something to look forward to going into this spring. So, yeah. And thank you, Marcus. Definitely appreciate that. So, Saturday, February 27th, we have Mississippi State at Alabama, Auburn at Ole Miss, Kentucky at Texas A&M, and Missouri at South Carolina. Again, I think Missouri at South Carolina and Kentucky at Texas A&M are both the matchups to watch for. Change my mind. You know what I mean. And then Sunday, we have Auburn at Ole Miss. That's not really a matchup to watch for. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't appeal to me. Anyway, Friday, March 5th, we have Alabama at Texas A&M, Arkansas at Florida, LSU at Kentucky, and Mississippi State at Tennessee. Arkansas at Florida is the matchup to watch for. If Arkansas is really as good as that 6-2 schedule says they are, I want to see them actually beat a true team. They obviously beat Texas A&M, which was kind of impressive, but they haven't fully proven it to me. Like, I think of the 6-2 SEC teams, I think Arkansas is probably the weakest of the 3. They're the most suspect because they haven't really proven themselves. They had to go 5 against Mississippi State, and then they had a little trouble against Ole Miss. So, prove me wrong, Arkansas. And then I guess LSU at Kentucky is good, but Kentucky is just miles ahead of LSU. So anyway, Saturday, March 6th, we have Alabama at Texas A&M, Arkansas at Florida, Georgia at Auburn, LSU at Kentucky, Ole Miss at South Carolina, and Mississippi State at Tennessee. Again, I still think Arkansas at Florida is the matchup to watch for. Maybe LSU at Kentucky, but the first matchup that I think is the one to watch for is Arkansas at Florida. And then Sunday, we have Georgia at Auburn and Ole Miss at South Carolina. Neither of those are appealing on Sunday, March 7th, so you can skip that day if you want. Anyway, so Friday, March 12th, we have Auburn at Missouri and Texas A&M at Georgia. I like that Texas A&M at Georgia matchup. I think that will be a fun little matchup, and I think Georgia can do it. I think Georgia can beat Texas A&M because A&M has not proven themselves unless they run the table. And Chris says, does home court advantage play a big role in volleyball? And Missouri has 4 road wins. The other 6-2 teams are not as good on the road. Yeah, I agree, but Missouri just has quite a bit of talent on that team of theirs. And to answer your question on does home court advantage play a big role in volleyball, I don't think so. Depending on the fansmanship. And to me, I don't think to fully answer your question, no, home court advantage does not play a big role because Mississippi State was able to beat Texas A&M on the road, and one of those matches had Texas A&M giving the first 250 students free hot dogs if they come. So I don't think home court advantage really plays a big role, especially unless it's like Florida, because Florida has a gigantic gymnasium. They call it the Swamp. So there's that. So anyway, Saturday, March 13th, Tennessee at Arkansas, Auburn at Missouri, Texas A&M at Georgia, Ole Miss at Kentucky, South Carolina at ASU. Again, I think Texas A&M at Georgia is the matchup of the weekend right there. Nothing against the other matchups, but that's kind of the matchup I have my eyes on. And then Sunday, and I guess maybe Tennessee at Arkansas is worthy enough, but I think Arkansas is just too good. And Tennessee and rounding up Sunday, March 14th, we have Tennessee at Arkansas and South Carolina at LSU. Yeah, both those matchups are somewhat appealing, but not overly appealing. But that's just me. Anyway, Friday, March 19th, we have Tennessee at Alabama, South Carolina at Arkansas, Mississippi State at Auburn, Kentucky at Florida, Georgia at LSU, and Texas A&M at Missouri. Now that weekend right there, Friday, March 19th, is the biggest weekend in SEC volleyball. Why? Because Kentucky plays at Florida, and that's going to be the biggest matchup of the year. And that could prove between who wins the SEC and who doesn't, because Florida currently is 2 games behind Kentucky. Can they turn it around? It still remains to be seen, but if I had to make my prediction, I'd probably say Kentucky wins, but anything can happen along the way. So, and then A&M at Missouri is also good, though I think Missouri is way better than A&M because, again, A&M just really disappointed me against Arkansas and Mississippi State. Like, if it was just Arkansas that they lost to, I wouldn't be overly disappointed. But Mississippi State is kind of, that's just my opinion. Change my mind. Anyway, Saturday, March 20th are the same matchups. Again, I think Kentucky at Florida is the matchup that ends all matchups. Watch for South Carolina at Alabama as well. That could be South Carolina at Arkansas. That was my bad. I'm getting my A's mixed up. South Carolina at Arkansas is also a pretty decent matchup. So, there's that. So, Wednesday, March 20th, we have Alabama at Kentucky. And Wednesday, March 24th and Thursday, March 25th are the same matchups. Those matchups consist of Alabama at Kentucky, Arkansas at Auburn, Florida at A&M, Ole Miss at Georgia, LSU at Tennessee, and Missouri at Mississippi State. So the matchup to me that I think is most appealing is Florida at Texas A&M. Like, that's basically Florida's last chance to probably clinch the SEC if they reign supreme over Kentucky, which I doubt, but we'll see. And that could pretty much be Texas A&M's championship right there, or their last gasp to be an at-large team for the NCAA tournament, because only 18 at-large teams get into the NCAA tournament. 30 teams will win their conference and automatically qualify for the NCAA tournament. And it's a field of 48 as opposed to being a field of 64. So there's that. And then March 29th through April 3rd is basically makeup week for any matches that gets canceled. And there's already 2 matchups that currently got canceled. Ole Miss at LSU, but we'll see where that's at. But maybe I passed it, but we'll see. So that's pretty much that for the SEC schedule release. I am really looking forward to the SEC. I hopefully look forward to seeing a competitive SEC. I hope someone can challenge Kentucky, because just because Kentucky has a powerhouse team doesn't mean they're invincible. So we'll see. And before we wrap up, time for the special announcement. So the special announcement for Set Point is that next week I will have a guest. She goes by the name of Emily Emin, and she is a former Northwestern women's volleyball player, and she works for Big Ten Volley Talk. She covers volleyball in the Big Ten for Volleyball Magazine, and she's going to be my guest next week. And I am really looking forward to having her on. However, next week's show will move to 12 p.m. Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern to accommodate to Emily's schedule. In terms of her work, of course. So, once again, next week's show will be moved to 12 p.m. Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern for Set Point. So, definitely tune in if you can. And without any further delay, it's time to drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you all for tuning in to Set Point. I definitely appreciate each and every one of you. Next up, we have the NorCal Faithful Sports Show with Big Dan. Definitely tune in because Big Dan does an amazing job. Thank you to everyone that tuned into the chat room. Chris Lemon, Marcus Losgrade, and Andrew Hagenbaugh. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. Have yourselves a great rest of the evening, and I will see you Friday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Have a great night, everybody.